By Wachira Kigotho, published Saturday, May 26, 2018 at 9:41, updated May 26, 2018 at 9:44 Greenwich Mean Time. 3 pupils study under trees in Nachurur Primary School in Tiaty, Baringo County, with rocks for desks. The children also have to watch for poisonous snakes and scorpions that inhabit the area. Kipsang Joseph, Standard. Some countries in Sub-Saharan Africa are spending meager resources in education, a Pan-African conference held in Nairobi found. Equatorial Guinea, a country whose per capita income stands at over $20,000, spends only 2.3% of its GDP on education. Also read, inside Kenya's most populated school, lack of textbooks, dilapidated schools and classrooms are the key constraints limiting pupils' access to learning in Equatorial Guinea, says Lucy Bassett, a basic education specialist at the World Bank, in a study on the current status of education in that country. Inadequate resources. Whereas not all countries in Sub-Saharan Africa have adequate resources to improve education, there are existing severe geographical, ethnic and culturally oriented disparities that could be dealt with without spending too much money. That is the situation prevailing in Kenya, where relatively small ethnic communities are more or less living in the early days of colonialism in terms of ability of their children to access education. Avoid becoming a victim of fake news. Subscribe to the Standard Group SMS service by texting NEWS to 22840. According to a joint report of the Ministry of Education, the World Bank and the Global Partnership for Education, such communities experience subjugation, marginalization, dispossession, exclusion or outright discrimination because of their cultures. The report on the vulnerable and marginalized groups in Kenya focused on Ogiek, Sengwer, Ajuran, Sakai, Makonde, Wakafundi and Waswaka that are either hunters and gatherers, pastoralists, nomadic or fishermen. One common factor among these communities is that their children face serious challenges accessing education. Surprisingly, even in circumstances where some of those small communities neighbor larger ethnic groups, they are still isolated in matters of schooling. The general assessment of the study showed that vulnerable and marginalized communities, often described as hard-to-reach groups, had similar problems. Most common among them are high school dropouts, truancy, high rate of pupil absenteeism, inadequate teachers and dilapidated classrooms. Also read, state to cut fees for middle-level colleges. The report highlights a school that had only 4 classrooms out of the required 8. The staff room doubled up as head teacher's office, residence for teachers and a store, says the report. Elsewhere, there was shortage of desks, and in one school, pupils from class 1 to 6 sat on the floors. Although Kenya has banned female genital mutilation, the practice seems to be unstoppable among some vulnerable communities. The practice that often spells doom for a girl's education stands at 40% among the Ogiek and Sengwer communities. But it is early marriages and teenage pregnancies that appear to be forms of active resistance against girls' education in almost all the vulnerable and marginalized communities. According to the report, early marriages stand at 80% among the Ogiek, 88 for the Sakai, 67 for the Ajuran and 60 for the Sengwer. While the prevalence rate for early marriages among the Wakafundi fishermen stands at a modest 25%, teenage pregnancy in that community stands at 75%. It is highest among the Makonde at 90%. The issue is rather serious in that early marriages in some of those communities occur at the age of 12 for girls and 15 for boys, says the report. Specific schooling issues also affect learning among the small communities, as education officials reported last year. Schools located in Ajuran areas were understaffed at the rate of 87% and 70% among the Makonde. Also read, Matuga games pushed to next week. Subsequently, understaffing might have contributed significantly to poor discipline that accounted for high pupil absenteeism in those communities. Almost in all those communities, truancy remains a major problem, as prevalence rate stands at 70% among the Ogi, 75% among the Ajiran and Makan 40%. The report lays major blame of poor learning and schooling among the vulnerable and marginalized communities in Kenya to retrogressive cultural trends and lack of interest in education in general. One wonders as to what mechanism the government will use to change this amid the struggle to achieve the African Union's vision of the Africa we want. Under this rallying call, TO seeks to ensure social and economic inclusivity, equitable quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all. Rampant poverty. Unfortunately, addressing disparities and gaps in education in Kenya and elsewhere in Sub-Saharan Africa is not merely restricted to expanding access and quality to traditional communities. In the words of Manos Antonines, the director of UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report, many African countries are yet to make progress in basic and tertiary education, thanks to rampant poverty, retrogressive cultural barriers and policy gaps. Indeed, a radical policy shift coupled with robust financing of public education is needed to boost school enrollment and quality learning everywhere in Sub-Saharan Africa, says Antonines. To achieve quality education and inclusivity at all levels, Kenya and other African countries would have to invest heavily in appropriate schooling and learning facilities by increasing expenditure on education and not merely asking pupils to sit on floors, sometimes in open-air classrooms. Also read, school heads ordered to move into institutions.